Hello, hello. We're going to do 223 and 224. Both pretty interesting questions. So it says an experimenter conducted a two-tail hypothesis test. So ultimately, a two-tailed test usually comes when you believe that we said battery A and battery B, what if they're the same? And the two-sided test would be if the problem reads, what if they're not the same? So when you think about that from a logic standpoint, that would mean if we get data that B is a lot bigger, or if we get data that A is a lot bigger, then either of those outcomes would be sufficient, either outcome would be sufficient evidence that they are in fact not equal. So that it gives you more possibilities. The possibility that B is greater than A, or the possibility that A is greater than B. And they ultimately calculated that, and when they calculated that, they got a two-sided hypothesis test of 0.44. So that would mean that the area under the curve was this and this, and so that would be insufficient evidence, right? Because this is a really big number, very big number. Now they want you thinking, if the experimenter had conducted a one-sided test on the same set of data, which would have been true? So ultimately, they're not really giving us any data whatsoever, but if you would have tested a one-sided, you would have started with the same H sub O, but the H sub A would have been either this or the other. And so once again, if the truth is that they are equal, and you're trying to prove that one is more than the other, then ultimately the same outcome would have happened. Let's just presuppose that we're dealing with this side. This still would have been this outcome of 0.22, but the item greater than that, let me get another. This could have been, if it was less, and this would have been the other side of that outcome. Again, you may end up getting the opposite of what you think if you got a one-sided. You may end up getting information where 78% of the time you're getting a larger outcome. Notice that would be D, and that is our answer here in the question. So, very interesting question. I haven't seen one like this. Now, next question, 224, let's take a look. It says a randomized experiment was performed on two different fertilizers, A and B. So we can call this average, would be X bar A, X bar B, in the number of A, the number of B, and the standard deviation of A, and the standard deviation of B. Notice I wasn't given the population standard deviation. So this would be a two-sample t-test. Two-sample t-test. I definitely have two samples, and I definitely can do my calculations on here. So, as I keep reading, it gives us the data that 16 were in one set, 17 in another. And the issue here is, since this is quantitative data, notice the number 16 is not greater than or equal to 30, and the number 17 is not greater than or equal to 30. So that's why they added this sentence. If that happens, you still can proceed with the test as long as the distributions don't show any strong sense of skewness and that there's no outliers present. So as long as this is the case, we still proceed even though these numbers are not approaching 30 because we're approximating. And that's what we do when we do a t-test. So now I'm going to take my fancy calculator, and the nice thing is you get a reassurance that you picked the right test, because when I get to a two-sample t-test, and they did give us all the statistics, so that is our input method. And notice everything we've listed here was given to us. So we feel good. You're like, oh, I have all the information needed here. So the X bar 1 was 19.54. The standard deviation of 1 is 3.68. There were 16 in my first sample. Now my second sample, the average was 23.39. 4.93 was my standard deviation, and 17 was in that sample. Now, nothing in the question shows any results as to whether or not I'm determining a one-sided or a two-sided. So I'm going to assume it's a two-sided test. And it was performed, this experiment was performed to determine whether the two fertilizers are different from one another. And so I don't know if one's supposed to be better than the other. So I'm going to stay with the two-sided test. Leave that no there. Hit enter. And there we go. So I got my p-value. My p-value is 0.016. Okay. So I did a two-sample t-test. My p-value was 0.016. If this was a free response question, you would have, of course, put your 8 sub O and your 8 sub A and listed your t-value. H sub O is that they're the same. H sub A is that they are not the same. And you should define what each of these are in the question. This would, you'd write out the whole words. This is the sample average of tomatoes planted for fertilizer A. You know, you'd say in words what each of those are. You define that. Okay? Now, with this p-value, I'm looking through here, and this is less than our significance level, which is 0.05. And so we do have evidence. We reject the null hypothesis. We do have sufficient evidence. And so ultimately, I'm looking here, this number, 0.016, is between 0.01 and 0.05. So D is the correct answer on both of these questions. Thank you for joining us.